Time to get spooky with the folklore of the Sandman and the horrifying story about him written by the author of The Nutcracker, E.T.A. Hoffmann. Our protagonist is a young college student in Germany named Nathaniel, and he's writing a letter to his fiancée, Clara's brother, Lothar. He says in his childhood he was terrified of the mythology of the Sandman. In some cultures, he's a benevolent being who sprinkles sleep dust in children's eyes. But Nathaniel's been told the darker stories, which is that he steals the eyes of children who would not go to bed and feeds them to his own children who live on the moon. That's him with all the eyeballs there. So Nathaniel tells this story about this traumatic childhood event that led him to associate a real man with the Sandman. His dad was an alchemical experimentalist, sort of like our idea of a mad scientist who you find out later was dealing with automatons. There was a man named Coppelius who often came and assisted his experiments. Nathaniel has this memory of sneaking in to watch them one night and seeing Coppelius take shining masses out of a fire and then hammering them into face-like shapes without eyes. Nathaniel screams, he gets discovered, and this Coppelius guy drags him out and threatens to throw the embers into his eyes and to burn his eyes. Nathaniel's father intercedes and says, please don't burn his eyes out. Coppelius twists his arms and legs until he passes out, and then he wakes up in his bed the next morning. Later, Nathaniel's dad dies in some kind of explosion, and Coppelius disappears and they never see him again. Now, the reason Nathaniel's telling this whole story in the letter is because he believes that this man who has just moved into his boarding house, an Italian guy named Coppola, is actually that guy, Coppelius, whom he thinks of as the Sandman, and he wants to seek vengeance. So next we see the reply to this letter, and it's not from Lothar, it's from Nathaniel's fiancée, Clara. Somehow she accidentally got the letter, and so she writes him back and she's like, dude, these terrors are probably some dream you had, and you need to just put this dude in your boarding house and the whole memory out of your mind. Then we see a letter of Nathaniel writing back saying, you guys are probably right. I don't think Coppola can be Coppelius because he's Italian, not German, and also there's this new Italian professor at my college. His name is Spallanzani, and he's friends with Coppola and vouches for him. It also adds that Spallanzani has this daughter named Olympia. So later Nathaniel returns home from his studies, and he and Clara are happy for a while, but he keeps getting gloomy, depressed and upset because he can't get over this trauma, and it leads to their estrangement. He literally writes a poem about Coppelius destroying his happiness and love because he blames him for all of this. In the poem, he shows up at he and Clara's wedding and touches Clara's eyes and throws Nathaniel in fire. He reads this poem out loud to Clara to explain his feelings, and she's like, oh my God, throw that poem in the fire. He says she is an unfeeling, cursed, inanimate automaton. Storms out, they're bad again, then they reconcile. Now then he returns for his final years of studying. The room where he's staying is across from the window where Olympia, the daughter of the Spallanzani, who's friends with Coppola, who might be Coppelius, but we don't know, he ends up staring her all the time across the way to her window and is just struck by her beauty. He does notice she doesn't seem to move a lot. One day he hears Coppola yelling, pretty eyes, and it awakens that horrible fear, but then he finds out he's just selling lenses and spectacles. So Nathaniel buys a telescope from him and uses the telescope to spy more on Olympia. So there's a big party where Olympia gets presented to the public for the first time, and she dances, she plays the harpsichord. But again, people are kind of unnerved by how she seems kind of stiff and cold to the touch. Nathaniel dances with her and remarks, wow, your rhythm is perfect, but she only says, ah. He visits her at her house and reads her the poems that Clara didn't like, and she's like, and he takes that as liking him. I bet you might be sort of figuring out what's up with Olympia. Well, one day Nathaniel decides, I'm gonna propose to Olympia, screw Clara. But when he gets to her room, he finds Spallanzani, her dad, and Coppola fighting over her body. She's laying on the floor, and they're arguing over who made the eyes and who made the clockwork. Nathaniel realizes Coppola really is Coppelius, the guy from his past, watches frozen in horror as Coppola overpowers Spallanzani and then runs off with Olympia's lifeless body and her empty eye holes. Because she's a robot. She's an automaton. Spallanzani yells at Nathaniel, go after him, get that automaton I've spent my life working on. But Olympia's eyes are lying on the ground, and it just sends Nathaniel off into madness. He tries to strangle Spallanzani, and then neighbors come in and pull him off, and he gets sent to an asylum. The whole thing's a big scandal. Spallanzani gets fired for trying to pass off a automaton as a human. Coppelius disappears again, and the narrator says after that many lovers took steps to ensure that they weren't actually dating a robot. So Nathaniel recovers and he goes home to Clara and Lothar and says, all right, I'm gonna marry Clara. I'm gonna put this all out of my mind and get sane. Nathaniel, Clara, and Lothar go to this famous steeple, and they go up to the very top to look out at the city. And he takes out that telescope. But as he's looking, he turns and catches Clara in the telescope. And seeing her through the telescope brings back all of this trauma of looking at Olympia through the telescope. Madness strikes him, and he tries to throw Clara off the steeple. Lothar stops him, and this crowd gathers below, like watching all of this happen. But then Nathaniel sees Coppelius in the crowd. Then Nathaniel screams, pretty eyes, and leaps off of the steeple to his death. Coppelius disappears, and then the narrator said that many years later, Clara gets married to a nice man and lives a good life, finding the domestic happiness and peace that Nathaniel never could have given her. So this story is a horrific depiction of the folklore Sandman character. Specifically, what Nathaniel is told in his childhood is that the Sandman throws a handful of sand into children's eyes so that they start bleeding from their heads, puts their eyes in a bag, and carries them to the crescent moon to feed to his own children who nest up there with crooked beaks like owls so they can peck the eyes of naughty human children. Yikes. What's interesting about this story is you never really know what's real, and the author does that on purpose. Did Nathaniel really see the man hammering eyes into human faces? Did the man really threaten to kill him? Did he kill his father? Were Coppelius and Coppola the same man? Throughout the novel, Nathaniel's childhood trauma drives him. So does his fear of losing his eyes. And he also feels there is a dark power that's after him, whereas Clara and Lothar think that it's all in his head, it's all psychological. It can even be argued that Coppelius Coppola isn't even ever real, that he's just the dark side of Nathaniel. The whole story revolves around sight and this idea that you can't trust what you see, which is terrifying. Freud talked about this story in his article, The Uncanny. Uncanny is something that seems familiar, but something's off. The German word for it actually means unhomey, not home. Quite. Leaves us with a feeling of creepiness we can't name, and this is also where doppelgangers come in, which is what we have with Coppola/Coppelius. Freud, of course, also brings up genitalia in his article, saying that Nathaniel's fear of losing his eyes has to do with the fear of losing one's genitals. Though I think losing your eyes is a scary enough thing to be afraid of. I also have a video on my playlist about Hoffman's original Nutcracker story, which is also horrifying and full of these fantastic folklore tropes that speak to our greatest fears as humans. Check out my book, Dust Spells, a reimagining of the 12 Dancing Princesses, and my podcast, Folktales and Fairy Lore. Link is in the bio.